All right, we can start saying all the important things now. I guess for me, the starting point and the real the biggest focus of where we're coming at and the kind of big thrust of why we wanted to have this conversation was really around that point of pushing beyond the norm, or pushing beyond the sort of most basic form of youth engagement. And I think, everyone in this room is probably is doing lots of different formats and different ways of approaching this kind of work. And first, just want to preface with the intention that there's no sense that what we're talking about, or that our ideas are the most revolutionary ones in this space, or that they're not things that people aren't already doing, because I think lots of people are doing really amazing stuff. But I think, Dan, I don't know where you might want to start, but I think we were really interested in some of the models that we are trying to design. That sort of push beyond the more consultative versions of youth engagement, I guess, and finding opportunities for young people to be leading where we can. So I don't know if you maybe wanted to start by sharing one of the stories we sort of talked about around the models you're working in now.
Why don't I do that? Because what I think's really interesting is I'm really interested in how do I create spaces where young people are really initiating activity and ideas. And I think that comes to do with, I try and really work in relational ways. So really in a way that's sort of like, how do I build trust? I really think that positioning in this work is important, that it's not just how do I do something. I was at a co-design session yesterday, the Telstra Foundation runner. There was a lot of like how you do co-design, but there wasn't as much talk about what do you have to bring to it. Like I'm interested in things like humility and removing my ego, and simultaneously that participation work really is a strong partnership. It's not just about giving young people voice. It's about creating space where they understand the expectations of within that voice, or what are they able to impact on? How can they? I think sometimes we do work where young people come with a whole bunch of really great ideas, but we haven't set expectations that allow them to understand that maybe that's not going to be able to happen, and how we do that really matters. So, example, what I'm trying to do with this sort of Project Rocket's National Youth Collective is, one, recognize that to be really representative, young people can only represent themselves. So I'm trying to get that sort of breadth. And I wanted to have the groups being rather small, because I've been doing all this online work with groups of 6 to 8 young people, and that seems like just the right amount. And you throw 20 young people in a Zoom space and it changes the whole dynamic. But I couldn't get the representation. So, have gone for like a few different groups, like 16 advisors, 16 creators, and then even around that, a group of young people that can just tap in time to time. And I want it to be something that runs not just for a year, but that runs over time. The other interesting thing about it is, like, I know there's lots of people that work within, we all work at it's easier on a level, and that's just easier because just documents and signing and permissions and child safe standards mean working with 18 to 25-year-olds creates a whole bunch of flexibility that's really easy. But Project Rocket works in secondary schools. So part of the collective is that we're working with 12 to 19-year-olds, which sets a whole bunch of challenges up that I might talk about a bit later, about working in the family context and those sorts of things. But in our chats, you really got me thinking about that time thing. Wonder if you wanted to talk about the fact that you just haven't got a YAG for a year, but that yours is going over a longer period of
Bit
time.
longer. Yeah, and I think the element that really that the time part speaks to, and what you were kind of speaking about there, is the relational part of it, I think, for me, in that. So essentially the sort of format that I'm working in is, it is a youth advisory group, but that is encompassing a number of different activities, some of which are just more consultative and sort of getting input on, policy work that we might be doing, and, asking key questions and getting young people's opinions, and other parts which are projects that are, led, created, designed as much as possible by our members and our participants. And then my role in that space is, as much as possible, to step back, to facilitate, in whatever way is needed, and do the boring admin tasks so that things can happen, so that young people don't have to spend time on that stuff. But as much as possible, putting myself in the position where, yeah, I'm letting the young people make as many of the decisions as we can. And I think that the time element comes in there, where I sort of quite intentionally designed initially an 18-month plan for our group, and I'm hoping that we can continue that beyond that, with an almost, many people are probably familiar with like the Hart's ladder of participation kind of model of like going from, adult-led, youth kind of are being informed, or small contributions, all the way up, and you climb up the ladder to sort of youth-led projects by the end of it. And the idea, or the metaphor I kind of had in my head, was this sort of sense of slowly climbing up the ladder as you created the conditions and the relationships so that it became more possible to do that. So I'd sort of viewed it as the first 6 months would really be that norming, storming, making the relationships work, establishing kind of a few simple initial projects that we would work with. The next 6 months, that next step of handing over power, where we kind of come up with a project that we're doing a national youth survey is the project we've been working on. And it was the project idea came from the organisation, and we had certain priorities with it. But the implementation and the design and all the decision making on how it would actually happen was handed over to the young people. So it was sort of more a partnership, in between. And then the final 6 months, which will be the latter part of this year, would end up another advocacy project, which will be completely decided by the group. And then I will really just be stepping into that facilitation, making it happen role. So there's kind of this sense of, I guess, building up to having the relationship, having the dynamic kind of working, having the young people understanding, our context and what is going to make sense for us organizationally. And I think also what you said before around, obviously the transparency part is a huge element of this too. And that comes to trust, in that we're always going to be in contexts where there are limitations on what we actually can hand over power about. There's certain decisions that are negotiable, and there's always going to be things that are non-negotiable, and that depends on the context you're working in. But if you've got that solid foundation of trust and the relationship there, then when you're being transparent, it's done in a way where the understanding is there, in that, like, I'm not telling you can't do this because I'm trying to shut you down. We have a clear relationship, and you understand that I'm bringing it to you because I want to be honest, and I want to make sure that you understand what we can and can't achieve together, sort of thing. So I don't know if that,
I love it. I'm so aspirational towards that idea of climbing the ladder. But I think it only can happen in certain circumstances, right? So the work that I'm doing with the Youth Advisory Council with the Telstra Foundation, that focus is really going to be more, it is adult sort of set, that the goals, the aims of what Telstra Foundation are looking to get from these young people as being set by the adults, and that's fine, and that's going to be how it works. But for the collective that I'm doing with Project Rockit, I want to be able to create that sort of space. I've got this vision of like there's a bucket of money there that is sort of untapped or unallocated.
Yeah. What do you want to do with it?
What do you want to do with it? And I'm wondering, have you thought about that, or do you know what I mean? Like, it's hard, funding applications are so, and to go to them and say, I want some money. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but something cool will happen. You just
that's a really good, and I mean, I think so much of this stuff comes down to that tension of like limitations versus, your aspirations, and there's always going to be a tension there. But I think that the funding pocket of it is really challenging. It's something that I have done for this sort of future project, which is still undecided. We've submitted a small grant application for $10,000, which there had to be some shape, I guess, to submit an application, and that was something that we kind of discussed with the group, that the shape would be, you will create some resources that will benefit some young people's mental well-being. Trying to be as vague as possible, and the format of the resources is TBD, and the dissemination strategy is TBD, and all that kind of thing. We'll see, I guess, how well that's received, whether we're successful or not, I don't know. But I think it is a good point, and a good kind of perhaps this isn't one that is for us to necessarily resolve, but one for funders, or, where there are funding opportunities that can be, I guess, less tied to specific outcomes. I think we've been really lucky in the funding stream that we have set up for our youth advisory group, in that the outcomes are policy briefs that our organisation will publish in collaboration with them, and some youth-led projects. And that like delivering a youth-led project is the outcome on that funding pool, which we're really lucky to be in that position where they are quite hands-off, and they're very happy for us to kind of make that happen in the way that we want to. But there are many situations where you don't have that kind of freedom. And so then I think it's about sort of, where are there other ways that you can hand over power that aren't necessarily over budget? If the budget is fixed, fine, but are there other other opportunities, even if it's just creating smaller ways for them to be engaged with your work? One of the things that I really tried for our youth advisory group as well is to set up opportunities for them to get involved in stuff that's outside of our regular meetings and our regular work. Like we've got some of them writing articles for our newsletter, we're bringing them along to speak on panels at conferences, like all of those types of things that are, I guess, creating those opportunities for them to lead and be able to speak and kind of say what they want to say in those spaces. We really don't put a lot of restrictions on them. So it's maybe that, a specific program or project may be fixed, but there might be other things that you can support the young people to get involved in or to participate in to build on that.
And that's what I love about the time piece. Like, I'm not saying that it's the be all and end all, but I guess it's that balancing. It's probably we've probably written it down in the agenda thing, but it's about that fact that, like, you want to offer an opportunity to participate to lots of young people, so you get a breadth, which has its own value and is like great. But at the same time, if you do it over a longer period of time, it's less young people, but you can get to somewhere else, and that there's good impact in both of those kinds of processes. I've been thinking about, I like the cleverness about that funding application being about, well, the process is using engagement project. In some ways too, I think we can be a bit more conversational depending on who your funder is. I did a big project. The way I sort of met Project Rockit or started working with them on contract was through this Office Free Safety project that was in real life, where we had all these videos. If you actually read the funding application at the start of that, that was going to be like a educational platform of like year sevens could log in and go through a whole bunch of stuff and all the rest of it. But as we did co-research with young people and the Young and Resilient Research Centre, and then spoke to young people that we brought together as an advisory group, it became very clear that that was not going to land. That wasn't valuable. And so we did a piece where we went straight back to the funder and said, hey, we know this was what was written down, but you were interested in us doing co-design and working with that, and that's what this has produced. So we have to turn the whole thing up on its head and change it, and we want to do all these videos instead. And as long as you are transparent and it's still in line with the outcome of what the sort of broader intention is, I think it's really interesting. And it's also really interesting to think about when you're working with young people, what the parameters are you place. Like for me, I want young people to create a space where they can initiate their ideas. And one way to get around that with the funding I'm thinking of and trying to work out is whether we can have some blue sky sessions where we do, and all of this is online, where they do some imagining and be like, these are the key themes we want to address. We'll do some rapid prototyping or something and go through some processes to go, here's some options of what we could do. So that when funding becomes available, or when some corporate comes and says, we've got some money, what would you like to do? Or they come and say, we think we'd like you to do this. We can actually say, well, here's 3 ideas that have been developed by our young people, ready to go for funding, that they're enthusiastic about, and come from them. That's one way I'm thinking about into the future with these young people, how we can do that. So it's giving them that space to do a little bit of planning. So
You've got those things to draw on and take advantage of the opportunities when they present themselves.
Yeah, and they have already said, this is where we want to go, or this is in our lived experiences what we think is most important.
And I think that speaks again to the part where to achieve something like that, you do have to have an ongoing arrangement with those young people. They can't be people that are going to, turn over in 6 months' time or disappear at the end of the year. But
Exactly, which is why
mm,
I'm feeling good about having, like, I'm surprised, to be honest, that I've developed, you know, and I've got these connections now with some 12, 13, 14-year olds. And after sort of having chats with them online, interviewing them and doing all the rest of it, I've realized that, you know, their participation has almost often come out of a family context.
mm,
Um, Even with the young man Isaac, who's part of the Telstra Youth Advisory Council that we got in contact through Big Hearts, which are also funded by the Telstra Foundation, and he's a young Indigenous man that lives in the Pilbara, and he's 13. Um, and his mum gave me a call, and it was quite clear that his mum was that same sort of parent that was like, I see value in this for my child.
mm,
They have a support behind them to do that. Now, I know some people work in different lived experience spaces and that these are sort of more generic spaces that I'm operating in, but it is interesting that for many young people, so, and when they're younger, you need some aspect of a parent, a guardian, some sort of adult that can actually help facilitate, because
mm,
there's just all of that extra stuff they want to, but they need those extra little bits of support sometimes to work out how to do it. So
mm,
I'm really interested in ongoing in this participation work I'm doing is trying to keep exploring what that means. More than just a signature on a page saying, yep, I give permission for my child to participate. It's bringing the parents or the family along for the ride too, so they at least have an understanding or know what's going on. But the fact
mm,
that I've got 13 or 14-year-olds means that there could be an opportunity through this collective for them to be part of what we're doing for 3, 4, 5, 6 years,
mm.
but not always in the same way. That's why I've tried to create these different, like, they're, you know, they'll dip out and maybe not be as focused in different ways, or they'll dip back in. It doesn't have to be always you're at a monthly meeting and doing stuff. Does that?
Totally, yeah. And I think, I love that, the earlier you start, the longer you can just hold on to them before, that's always going to be the problem with working with young people, right? Is they'll quote unquote age out of being a young person at a certain point. Um, but I think also just the ability there to create, yeah, as we've kind of been speaking about, it doesn't just have to be one thing and one way that they engage. And I think this is true of all community engagement, not necessarily just young people, but that like different people will go through different periods of their life and different, phases and even just levels of interest, where the format of how they engage with you, that will suit them best is going to be different. And I think there's so much value in creating opportunities to stay connected with people once the basic format stops working for them. If someone can't keep coming to advisory group meetings, it's still so great to have another way that you can keep them involved and to create other opportunities and other connections with them. And I think like that point around like create them kind of growing into leaders in that context, in your sort of situation makes so much sense to me, that they wouldn't necessarily have to be, a quote unquote regular participant, but there's like opportunities for peer mentoring and all that kind of thing when a young person has been the one that's gone through your arrangement for a number of years to then have some new role for them. Like I think that part of it is so useful, and that really just continues the relationship, which is what we've been talking about really, I think,
I
the
think
whole
we have to
time,
think about it in terms of almost, it sounds odd, but almost the ethics of participation, right? So
Mm,
I do know that for this work I've been doing, gathering some more young people up for another thing, um, have drawn one more deliberately, in the sense that Lucy, the CEO of Project Rockit, was up talking to the group that AYAC had put together for the government that was working with Minister Anne Ali. And there was some questions at the end. They were all finishing up and they were like, well, what happens now? And it was sort of like, well, that's the end now. That's done. And we've had a couple of those people then apply to us, because Lucy was like, well, if you're looking for something to do, this is an opportunity for you. But it speaks to that idea of like, well, if we are going to offer agency to young people and get them involved in things, whether it's a local government level or, within an organization, if it is going to be a year, how do you set that expectation up at the start? Or if it's not going to just finish, what might you be able to do afterwards that allows a space for that young person to keep building and growing within their, whether it's some sort of advocacy, lived experience advocacy role, or some sort of way that they want to contribute to community in other ways. It doesn't just have to be youth participation. Hey, you can sort of move off into volunteering here, or you could become part of a, committee of management for your, local whatever service. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it speaks so much to, I'm conscious of the time that we don't want to go on too many more tangents. We will finish this conversation shortly. But I think really like the heart of all of it is relationships and about, you know, if you have a relationship that with a young person that has a sense of connection to you personally or to your organization, and they're coming to you at the end of something and saying, what now? I want to keep doing stuff, and you're not creating something to keep them engaged and keep them connected to you, or you're not facilitating further opportunity there. And obviously, it's not always possible, but even if it is just directing them to another organization where they can continue developing themselves, like there's so much value in the relationship that you built with that person to just say, nope, this is the end, off you go, see you never. Like it feels like such a waste of that really important connection that you have. And I think that kind of level of connection and care there is really at the heart of what we're trying to do. And those people are the best advocates. Like I think it's so easy to just lose all of that amazing work if you just sort of say, yep, we've finished up now and off you go kind of thing. So I think there's so much in
I
that.
think that's so true to the youth worker tradition and the way all of you in this audience that are trained and work in those sorts of ways, that you deeply understand that and practice in that way. And I'm just sort of looking at it going, oh, that kind of work within a youth work perspective needs to really continue to flow through into a participatory perspective as well, because that's yeah, really strong. I think we've almost come to a natural conclusion. I like the
I
fact
think so.
put on the relational thing really strongly there as the fine. I think
Mm,
hopefully we've shown you that it's not we're not sort of suggesting that one way is better than any other way. It's just how do we explore and continue to sort of improve on these things. So my understanding now, because it's 10 past 11, we're doing well on time. We're going to have a 5-minute break, as we usually do around this time, just to give people a break from the whole sort of screen-based sort of stuff. But we'll come back in 5 minutes at about 11:15, and then yeah, you'll have a chance to go and take what we've said and have your own conversations in small groups that Sam's going to set up for us and do. So hey, thanks so much. That was a good chat. I enjoyed it.
yeah, me too. Thanks so much, Dan. And thanks everyone.